You ever been in a group, maybe a club, a volunteer gig, anything really, where everything looks democratic on paper? They've got a constitution, they hold elections, but it just feels oppressive? Like you just know a tiny secret group is actually calling all the shots? Yeah, it's a really weird, unsettling feeling, and it's a classic story of how good groups go bad. Today, we're going to unpack that exact process. So what we're going to do in this explainer is give you a clear framework, a kind of manual, really, for understanding what's going on and maybe even surviving it. We're going to map out, step by step, how a group can look totally democratic on the outside while really running on unwritten rules and, frankly, a bit of fear. Okay, let's dive right in. The whole problem really starts with this huge gap. See, on one side, you've got the official stuff, the Constitution, the elections, the promise that everyone gets a say. But on the other side, you've got what it actually feels like for members, a system that runs on who you know, a whole lot of silence, and a few people holding all the cards. And here's the crucial thing to get. This doesn't happen overnight. It's not some dramatic coup. It's a slow drift. It's this quiet, gradual process where what's really happening pulls away from the official rules until all you're left with is a hollow, democratic-looking shell. This diagram right here, it maps out that whole journey. The source material calls this organizational drift, and we're going to use it as our roadmap to see exactly how a group goes from a genuinely healthy democracy to, well, a total facade. So how does this actually play out? Well, this drift happens in 5 surprisingly predictable stages. Let's break down exactly how a group can go from a solid, healthy blueprint to just a hollow mask, step by step. As you can see, the whole process is a slide from the top, where power is spread out, down to the bottom, where it's all concentrated in one place. So let's walk through each of these 5 stages, starting at the top with a healthy blueprint. All right, stage 1, the blueprint. Every story has a beginning, and in this one, things are actually working the way they're supposed to. The group has a solid democratic foundation. The rules on paper actually match what's happening in real life. Power is shared, and people feel safe to speak up. But then comes stage 2, the bottleneck. This is the first really subtle warning sign. A few people start to control the agenda. They decide what gets discussed and when. By managing that flow of information, they basically create a bottleneck, and power quietly starts to drift their way. Now the whole vibe of the group starts to change. This is stage 3, the adaptation. Members aren't dumb. They see what's happening. They see there's a small social price to pay for speaking out of turn. And as that informal pressure builds, real debate just fades away. It's replaced by caution and then by silence. It just becomes easier to say nothing. By stage 4, the inner circle, this informal power structure is pretty much locked in. Everybody knows there's a small group making the real decisions before the official meetings even start. The meeting itself, it's just a rubber stamp for what the inner circle already decided behind closed doors. And the crazy part is, it starts to feel normal. And that brings us to the final stage, the mask. The Constitution is probably still on the website. They might even still hold elections. But it's all a performance, a show. The democratic structure is now just a mask, hiding the reality that all the power is held by a few key people. The soul of the group is gone. But why? Why does this happen so predictably? It's so tempting to just blame a single toxic leader, right? But the truth is, it's so much deeper than that. There are these powerful structural forces at play that drive this drift and make this slide into rule by a few feel almost inevitable. Let's start with a really basic question. In a group that has clear rules and defined rules, why do people eventually just start listening to a powerful personality instead of the rules themselves? The sociologist Max Weber gives us a really useful way to think about this. He drew a line between what he called legal, rational authority. That's power that comes from the position, from the rules, and charismatic authority, which comes from the sheer force of someone's personality. Well, organizational decay really kicks in when people's loyalty shifts from the office to the person. Now, this next question, this is one I think many of us have asked. Why does everyone just go along with it? Why do good people just clam up, even when they know in their gut that something is really, really wrong? The thinker Antonio Gramsci had a brilliant take on this. He explained that informal power works by making weird things feel normal over time. A rule gets broken once, then it happens again. Pretty soon it's familiar. Then it gets really hard to challenge.
And eventually, it's just how things work here. The silence isn't people agreeing, it's people adapting. And that brings us to maybe the most important question of all, the one that points the finger directly at the system, not just the people in it. Why does it seem like in almost any organization, a small group somehow always ends up in charge?
A sociologist named 𝗹𝗲𝗱𝗀𝗀𝗃 called this the iron law of oligarchy. His big argument was that the very act of organizing itself tends to create rule by a few. It's because the leaders naturally get advantages. They have more information, they know the procedures, they set the agenda that regular members just can't compete with. This makes the whole drift thing a structural problem, not just a personality problem.
And this is what that change in climate actually feels like from the inside. The formal rules are still on the books, but the unwritten rules have totally changed. Criticizing an idea isn't just a disagreement anymore, it gets twisted into a moral failure. Suddenly you're being negative or not a team player. So yeah, technically you can still participate, but it sure doesn't feel safe for everyone anymore. Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem pretty thoroughly. Now what do we do about it? How do you fix it? The biggest takeaway from all of this is that if you want to reverse the drift, you have to repair the system. Just swapping out the leader is never going to be enough.
The source material offers a 5-step framework called replacement without repetition. First, you have to call out what's happening, name the pattern. Then, the whole goal has to be moving authority back to the rules and the offices, not just to a new, more likable personality. That means you've got to fix the structure, things like how information flows or who gets on committees. And it's crucial to make your case about the health of the group, not your personal beefs. Finally, any new way forward has to act differently from day one, modeling the very transparency and fairness it's promising. So let's just boil this all down to the absolute must-know takeaways. 1. Having a rulebook means nothing if it isn't actually used to limit power. 2. Holding elections is just an empty ritual if people are too scared to speak their minds. And 3. The big one. Just changing the leader is like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone if the messed up structure that created the problem is still there. And that brings us to our final question. Something for you to really think about. When you look at an organization you're part of, what lens are you actually using to see it? Are you just seeing the official rules, or are you seeing how power really works? Because this right here is where so many of us get it wrong. We only use the strategic design lens. We focus on the org chart, the official rules. But the real game is being played through the political lens of power and the cultural lens of unwritten norms. Learning to see your organization through all 3 of these lenses at once, well, that's the first and most critical step. Not just to understand why these groups fail, but to have any real shot at actually fixing them.